We can go from this to this in a matter of minutes thanks to the magical world of 3D assets. I'm Abbey Esparza, and I've been creating creative composites for over 10 years now. I was also lucky enough to be alive during the early 2000s, and I'm more than happy to re-embrace some of those Y2K trends. All resources featured here today can be found on Envato Elements, as always, where you get unlimited downloads of graphics, photos, and fonts, all with simple commercial licensing. Let's start things off by extracting our subject, using subject select and a layer mask. This will just give us a good starting point. We can then refine that mask using a hard round brush set to white, just filling in the areas that obviously shouldn't have been masked. Then we can go into select and mask and use a mix of the refine edge brush and global refinements to smooth out our mask. Don't forget to click the refine hair button for a quicker hair mask, but that'll be all the masking our subject really needs. The Y2K aesthetic doesn't really require things to be too detailed, so a quick mask will do just fine. Let's add a quick grassy hill background to our subject, placing it at the very bottom of our layer stack, where it will stay. We can then create a new layer set to soft light and paint black on the blue sky area. This is a quick way to deepen a sky, adding separation from the subject and her environment, but also kind of helps bring out the details in the clouds. Next, right at the top of our layer stack, we're going to create a new group named Color Grade. The group will contain 4 adjustment layers, all meant to boost vibrance and adjust the cyans to be a deeper royal blue color. So let's start with a hue saturation layer targeting the cyans, set to a hue of +10 and a saturation of +38. The bottom rainbow slider is what helps pinpoint the color we're choosing to affect. Try to replicate something similar to what you see here, though it doesn't need to be exact. Settings almost never need to be exact. Next, we have 2 color lookup layers, the first set to 3 strip at a 30% or so opacity, and the second set to crisp winter at a 20% opacity. Finally, we have a third color lookup layer set to foggy night with a layer mode of multiply and a 17% opacity. We also want to adjust the blend if settings found in the layer styles panel, which you can access by double clicking, and then replicate something to what you see here. Basically, we're removing those dark shadows from the highlights of the image. To finish color adjusting our subject, I used Filter, Neural Filter, Harmonization, setting the reference image to our background layer and bringing down the strength to around 50%. This filter isn't always consistent, so you can play with the settings if you need to. And if you don't end up liking the results, you can actually completely skip this step. We do want her red highlights to be green, so that they accurately reflect the green of the grass. So let's create and clip a hue saturation adjustment layer into the subject, setting the reds to a hue of 116, a saturation of -37, and a lightness of -33. Remember to use the rainbow gradient slider at the bottom to specifically pinpoint the red highlights of the subject. With our reds now a lime green, we can mask out any overly green areas of skin. We'll be adding some reddish pink trees, so the remaining red highlights are not a problem. We're mainly wanting that green highlight to be on her clothes. I'm going to add a quick frowning face to our subject's jacket using this icon set, though any simple illustration would work. I turned the face white using a hue saturation with a lightness of +100, and then lowered the opacity to 75%. Just a small optional detail. Next up, we're going to tackle that flowing bit of grass coming from her helmet. So let's duplicate the background layer, bringing it below the color grade group, and setting it to a layer mode of lighten. Enlarge the grassy hills just slightly, and flip the layer horizontally. That'll help avoid any overtly repeated grass textures or detail. Add a layer mask and invert it to black using Ctrl-I. Now we can mask the grass back in wherever we want it. In this case, between the subject's legs and slightly into that helmet. A default round brush will work perfectly fine, but you can also try using a grass-shaped brush. You can also repeat this step as much as you'd like. I'm going to add a bit more grass coming from the inner portion of the helmet. And to make the grass appear full and less transparent, we can create and clip a new layer into the subject, setting that layer to multiply. Now fill in areas with a dark hunter green color. You can use a semi-hard round brush, but again, a plant-shaped brush would work really well here. I actually really like Photoshop's default grass brush quite a bit. The rest of our landscape will be made up of all 3D assets, which will not only make compositing this super quick, but help us achieve that Y2K aesthetic. Let's start with placing in some of these fantasy ice mountains that also have a crystal mountain vibe. You can choose different angles of a 3D asset on Envato Elements by selecting View 3D Render. Then you can drag to rotate. You can choose to either download as a PNG or PSD. If I want to remove a shadow, I'll select PSD, if not, I'll choose PNG. All of the 3D assets we're using today are actually single assets, but at different angles. So let's place 3 or 4 of those different angles of the ice mountains right on the skyline of the background. Group them together, add a layer mask to that group, and mask out the bottoms of the mountains so that they all sit on the skyline properly. Now let's add 2 giant 3D statues in front of the mountains but behind the subject. We also want to brighten the statues by clipping a soft light layer into each statue and painting a soft bloom of white light on each. Set the layer's opacity down to around 50%, just so the light isn't overly harsh. We can then add 2 smaller ice mountain assets right to the front of the statues. Since these mountains are closer to the subject than the original mountains, I like to add a brightness contrast of -18 brightness and a +32 contrast to each mountain. And that's because objects closer to the foreground will appear darker than those further away. Next, we can create an ultra-quick fantasy forest using this blue tree asset, but at multiple angles. Place the trees at different points in the landscape, making sure the further they are, the smaller they appear. You'll want to group all of these trees together once you're happy with their placement. And that's because to make these trees pop even more, we're going to change the blue colored leaves to a pink color, using a clipped hue and saturation adjustment layer, clipping it right into that tree group. Then we want to go into the blues and set the hue to +89, saturation to +58, and the lightness to -22. We can also bring in some of those icy mountains closer to the foreground. You can just duplicate and enlarge the mountains initially placed in front of the statues, but darkening them even more as they are that much closer to the subject. And we're going to finish everything up by adding in some quick atmosphere over the statues, mountains, and trees, but all behind the subject. First, create a layer set to normal, but with a lower opacity of 15%. On this layer, use a very large soft round brush to paint in a bit of white haze on the left and right sides, focusing on the middle to upper portion of the canvas. Doing this will add slightly more separation from the subject and her environment. Next, create another normal layer, this time set to 25% opacity. On this layer, we're going to paint soft white clouds over the upper portions of the statues. This will help them appear taller. Now create a new layer set to screen at around 70% opacity. Paint a violet-purple haze around the mountains and statues using a soft round brush. And then adjust the blend if settings of that violet haze to only appear in the background highlights. And that is all there is to recreating that early 2000s 3D aesthetic. All made super easy thanks to 3D assets. If that wasn't enough and you're looking to learn even more, why not check out some of the other videos that Envato Tuts Plus has to offer. If you liked this video, consider giving us a like and even subscribing if you haven't already. And don't forget to click the little bell icon to be notified of all new videos, including tips, tricks, and tutorials. Happy designing, see you next time.